That's the fundamental disconnect between vendor and where the vendor, how they view these attacks versus the actual risk in the software supply chain. But developers are still the weakest link here. And even for supply chain security, we have to train these developers in a better fashion so that they can look in the way of attacker as the attacker look upstream instead of trying to hack the finished product. They look to target a tool and process just because the supply chain is so distributed. And they are not looking for the end product just as 10 years or 15 years ago.
Welcome to Season 4 of The Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host, AppSec enthusiast, and growth manager at Escape. Today, I'm joined by Aamiruddin Syed, Senior Product Security Engineer at AGCO Corporation. Aamiruddin is the author of Supply Chain Software Security book focusing on AI, IoT, and application security, and a recognized advocate for secure development. He's a frequent speaker at major conferences including RSA, DEFCON, and Black Hat. Fun fact, he was once ranked in the top 1% of all TryHackMe penetration testers. He is also a fellow podcaster, co-hosting the CyberGPT Pulse Podcast. In this episode, we dive into the complexities of software supply chain security, especially touching on the risks introduced by third-party extensions and how generative AI can strengthen defenders across supply chain. We also explore the challenges of data equality when training AI models and discuss why strong governance is essential for secure developer practices. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. And with that, get ready to hear Aamiruddin's opinions. Dive right in. Hi everyone. Today on podcast with me is Aamiruddin Syed, who is one of the experts in software supply chain security with one book on this topic. Also a podcast host, so very experienced into having those conversations about security. So I'm super excited to have you on board today. And yeah, we met at the RSA at actual podcast recording as well. So it was great. It's great to have you on board.
Thanks, Alexander, for the invitation when we meet in RSA. And I'm excited here to meet you and as well as the audience of yours.
I think software supply chain security was kind of last year a huge topic. Everyone was talking about it. I think almost like for entire second season it was everyone because of CrowdStrike outage. Everyone was talking so much.
Yeah.
About it. I think 2 weeks ago, I also came across one of the articles. I think it was an article on dark reading. It was about research, how IDE third-party extensions actually now is also potentially, threat vector in software supply chain. I think it was a research by another vendor who kind of what they've done, they created a new extension of our Visual Studio Code and submitted it on the Microsoft Extension Marketplace. And then realized that after approval, they could actually kind of modify it to inject malicious input, and Microsoft would not be. Actually, they didn't see that it was malicious. They just approved it's approved, not a problem. And they said that the research in itself doesn't meet the company's kind of bar for immediate action, which is kind of weird. It means everyone can basically now follow this, create third-party extensions, validate them, and then inject malicious input. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So thanks for picking a good point of start there. So the VS Code extension research, which these guys did, was a very good POC. We can just start with how that actually was covered. You have covered a bit sneak peek of that. So the researcher basically was able to sneak the malicious code as attack vector in the marketplace. Usually the marketplace does check the signature of these malicious code, but usually these signatures are not behavior pattern. These are just existing patterns, and then they look to elevate or caveat on that. But in this case, this was not detected as a malicious signature, so marketplace accepted it in the developer store. And for a developer, this is a very significant thing, because even as a security policy, we always tell developers to use the approved extension, and then that's kind of a reliable thing to do even in security policy. And if that is being abused even through the review process, then this kind of a very eye-opening kind of research. Although this kind of even further significantly showcase the attack surface which ID extension has. We do have a complete source code repository to environment variables to build pipeline to IPC, to inter-process communication and network access to the internal development infrastructure as well. So the attack surface is pretty massive. And in infrastructure, if you have a very wide attack surface, it's really kind of tricky to see where it can bring the trickle down effect just having a small gap in this. Yeah, so developers usually do just like a human can make mistakes and do smaller mistakes, keeping those environment variable open. And so if there is some extension which is maliciously able to do any injection, then that injection can easily reduce a particular production hijack as well. So although this researcher pointed out that this was, even though on a basic scale, the extension doesn't have to do anything complicated. It could just read the code, and extension is allowing the read itself. So they didn't went through the write and other malicious nitty-gritty, but they just stopped at read. But obviously the attacker won't stop there. So in this case, I think Cursor was a vendor, and they kind of responded in a very dicey scenario that yeah, this research was not that impactful. We were working on, of course you have to work. Uh, we didn't, as with any third party attack, you have to work with the vendor and the supplier. So here, Microsoft has to also reply in a better fashion than saying that this research is not meeting the company bar for image servicing. So there need to be much more detailed answer that why they are thinking that this research is not at the bar of their meet. And also the vendor need to also verify the extension for any of the signatures apart from just what they have in our. Usually verifying the signature is one, and the second part is to actually signing these extensions. So whenever a supplier is providing a particular package, they need to sign this, cryptographically sign them, and there should be a third party PKI or any third party. Even you can use some other third party signing authority. Having these self, even for the self signed certificate, is much more lower kind of stuff which we try. But for a higher standard security, we can have a very good third party C authority which can fundamentally alleviate these problem in future. You cannot just rely on a sweet approval process. In past also we have a similar incident with the Apple Store where they were able to infiltrate the approval process. So we have to ask the right question as well, that does the approval process of these marketplace and store require a review that where they're actually lacking. So that's the fundamental disconnect between vendor and where the vendor, how they view these attacks versus the actual risk in the software supply chain. So of course, this is one concern, but developers are still the weakest link here, and that need to be even further look forward, that how they able to secure the application themselves. Even for supply chain security, we have to train these developers in a better fashion so that they can look in the way of attacker, as the attacker look upstream instead of trying to hack the finished product. They look for to target the tool and process, just because the supply chain is so distributed, and they are not looking for the end product. Just as 10 years or 15 years ago, the client side attacker much more provident. But right now, as with AGCO and even with this attack, we have seen they are looking to get into the developer side or development side. So as we have been talking a lot about left security, this kind of can be called as shift left attack as well. That's why shift left security is much more important. But it is my personal opinion that shift left security has been very overused for communication, but it's not been applied in a real fashion. There have been a lot of challenges to apply shift left security, how we actually get into the development process to secure it before working to the end. But the cheaper and effective, still the effective process is to fix the code, fix the security issue in the development, than to wait till the testing and implementation. And even in my field, where we have been seeing that there there are certain challenges that we sometimes the development process is months long, 12 months or 18 months long. So you lose sight of a certain processes which you have determined initially. So these kind of that's why the moving security checks which is already in place, just like a security gate, does help to avoid what we have forgotten said. So we have been focusing on so much of security check earlier, and then we may forget about the securing the actual tool and an environment. In this case, GitHub or your VS Code can be your environment. So this need to be also taught that people should also lock their car door, but they shouldn't forget to also keep the keys secure, which we have been doing right now, to keep it in a Faraday box, something like that. So that's where the much more shift of thinking goes on.
I think like a lot of people indeed think that the shift left is now overused in communication, but indeed in practice it's much harder, and more recommendations depending also on the industry can either shift everywhere. Sometimes you mainly need shift right, if it's gaming industry and your main problem, people trying to cheat or attackers trying to hack the system, then it's more like maybe runtime where you should focus on. But it's interesting, like you mentioned, Indina, that in your experience, quite often you recommend developers to only download extensions that are kind of approved by a marketplace, but it might be, they don't always listen, or in big organizations, quite often it's also you might hire, freelance developers for a specific project. How would you recommend, someone to ensure that from security side of you, that it goes, kind of beyond just one time, maybe during the onboarding, recommending do not install third-party extension? Is there ways to control that or enforce it, or do we have to rely entirely on them, like listening to you?
No, so the first part is actually governance, where you have to provide the necessary governance policy to the developers. But of course, you cannot rely on human to actually follow the governance policy. That's not in the nature. We do want to innovate, and for innovation, sometimes even though they know the governance, but the tools they are trying to use, they are not available with the approved process. So like with LLM, and even in recent past with agentic AI, we have seen this problem again, that newer tool doesn't have the approval process, they don't have that review process. So and but for innovation, for a newer tool to be built, you have to use these newer applications. So what to do here? So that's why we have to rely on security gates and security tools. That can be FCA or a secret scanner and container scanner, depending on the application. But that's where the problem again arises, that sometimes I've seen loads of these CI/CD pipeline security going on, all running together, but not actually working together. So running together is one thing, and then working together is another thing. So that's their problem. The integration also, once you have integrated the visibility of these tools to actually show the impactful application, which is giving which might increase the risk posture. That's the calculation which you need to do. Most of these tools do it between silos, that if you are running SCA, it will give a silo view of a particular open source dependency. But if you are running your container scanner, it might give some image verification, attestation gaps. But if these two are interrelated, that particular container image which is in silo scan, but it will be actually in the runtime be used by the application which is using this open source dependency, but you have not correlated these two, and you are seeing these in silos. Maybe they are low risk when running separately, but when they are combined, it might increase the risk factors. So this is one gap which I've been seeing in the industry. It's really hard to elevate or mitigate this risk, but one main solution is to actually have a better visibility of your scan results and then correlate them to with each other tools. So that's one way to work on. And then there is an issue with integration itself.
Yes.
Just having these meaningful result, and then seeing what actually are you catching the issues which actually matter, and then can the developer act on these findings easily. So you have to make the findings so assimilable that the action point is very easy to run. So the tool just not to just point out the particular component or package type, they have to also give the particular component path where the component has been executed, as well as the mitigation code base. So these things are much more important. Improve the mean time to remediate. So that's one thing which efficient scanner should do. Then it need to be configured with the right policy, even if it is. So that's where most of the scanner are being efficiently able to integrate with your GitHub PR and generating PRs for these findings. But The problem is that if it is not rightly configured, you will have so many insights, but you don't know if these are actionable or not, because most of are just very noisy. You are getting some 90,000 just 90,000 findings over some 100 resources, so you will just overlook it, and even the developers will be overlooking it. So that's where the frustration comes on, and we have to start measuring. That's why I was in the past first part saying that how to measure and risk score the findings based on the security tool according to your environment, to find out the applicability of these risk which these tools have been flagging off.
Yeah, so if, for example, you would always recommend to build your own score because, for example, a lot of vendors, and especially like that's why all ASPM platforms were kind of put in place to invent correlation between all those tools and assign score. But I guess what at least I'm understanding is that you would always recommend to create your own score, right? Adapting to yours, no matter what they advise. How would you, right?
Yeah, so it's just not creating your own score. It's actually correlating the findings to the application, so whether that is applicable or not. So impact factor. The impact factor is very qualitative. So these tools will have some qualitative understanding based on the past data points, but from your organization data point, you have better understanding which of these findings are actually important. Like one of the finding can be of a client side application, another findings can be from an internal open port. So although it is a SSH open port, but you know for a fact that this is a test machine, and this will be just open for a very limited time when we are testing that particular machine. And even if it is compromised, it will just compromising a test ports on test machine. So it wouldn't be that much of a risk for the organization. But if there is an open port on a machine which is actually client facing, then that can be of a higher risk. So in this, one of the current solution people are using is SBOM and trying to correlate with SBOM, but the SBOM is also not that efficient because we do not have a complete SBOM. The SBOM will be having maybe the software vendor information, but might be lacking behind on the container image information. You have to have HBOM, SBOM, AI bomb. So there are so many bombs. So an application right now has all kind of technology. It will be using AI, it will be using applications, and these application tools and containers images as well. So it's really difficult to correlate them. So this is a very challenging factor. But one thing which I'm relying on my current process is to have LLM or Gen AI being used to actually learn from this and then provide a particular oversight. And this oversight then fed as a feedback to the existing tool, and then we can create a new policy configured out of that. Yeah, this work in some ways better, but we have to work for further on in this system. That yeah, this is a very very open problem in the industry, specifically for supply chain.
And how specifically, like when did you decide to implement GenAI and what kind of data do you feed, apart from like SBOM, do you feed into it and how do you optimize it? Is it the algorithm that you've created yourself or is it the algorithm that you're using that accessible, for example, for any of the listeners that they can as well benefit from?
Yeah, so the decision point of using Gen AI is when we have large amount of data to actually use it. So if you are just having certain POC and running LLM on some 10 MB of data, having some few thousand of files, it might be not that useful unless you have some large massive data, because the essence and the genesis of LLM, few of people doesn't know, starting off massive data set. 2015-16 massive data set was the first thing where these algorithms were started to design. We moved from reinforced learning to actually working on transformer. Initially it was RNN and other stuff, to actually find meaningful information from these unstructured data. So you don't have to convert these as text into table to actually map it better, but you can directly fed these PDF file and doc file in your system, and the system, your model will be able to summarize it in a certain fashion and then store it as an index document, and then based on that index database it will act from whatever query you are making. So that's the essence of LLM. And that's why the first thing is to have a very large database, or if you are working with codes, it should be very large code base. And then the next step will be enriching and automating it with your SBOM. GenAI can also be helpful to generate SBOM. I've seen certain exercises to be GenAI to generate context-rich SBOM flagging certain transitive risk, which the transitive risk is one which we have seen is not directly found of in many of these security tools as well. So that's one thing which is where GenAI research I have seen is useful, and then providing the attack path and tagging the components for criticality. So it helps prioritizing in the team itself to have these action item before even these reactive items is there. So they can just prioritize before even have these vulnerabilities getting into the critical pipeline. And then it does also help to triage and fix the suggestion as well. I was trying, this is the one part which I'm working on to summarize the actual root cause, and maybe you have the root cause being assimilated in maybe 10 or 15 of these vulnerability findings, and you can then map them out and find one root cause, and then effectively you have one action item in place of 15. So yeah.
Do you think that you mentioned is one of the first things you have to have a large amount of data? In a lot of cases, the biggest problem with AI, with LLMs, with GenAI, with AI agents now is that it's like garbage in, garbage out. So a lot of data, which is like, okay, you have a lot of data, but it's one big mess. And quite often, like especially I think in the software supply chain where you have just so many data points that are dependent on other vendors of other third parties that you can't control, where you can't control the quality. Do you think we can actually easily rely on AI for that specific application or to get the value in software supply chain security?
Yeah, so this is what I've actually also talked about in my book there, that as we have been moving from those manual code writing to AI generation, even Google is pointing out that we will be moving into having more than 50%, maybe 70% of their code base being AI generated. So in this case, if there is certain bugs in the AI code itself and your model is learning based on your AI AI testing test cases, which is generated by another LLM, then of course the model which is learning from the existing AI generated bug based code, it won't be able to find something different which we are expecting. So it's mostly in the regression model we see that it's getting overfit after if you have a similar kind of patterns. It need to be fed on with the bias as well as variance of the pattern. So bias and variance need to be very on the balance factor. If there is much higher bias, then it will be much oriented to one topic, as we have been seeing in LM. Then if you have been talking to your own LLM, it get biased to your personality.
Mhm.
If you are, that's where with AI generator, I have one doubt that how much our LLM will improve. And what I'm already seeing is, as we were been predicting that after 3.5, 4 will be really massive improvement. But even 4 or the next version of O1 and these things are not getting that massive improvements as compared to saw with 3.1 when initially it was launched, and then it was conversing with the various training set with the various conversation of users. It get improved much faster than what we are seeing in the latest models. It doesn't have that much of memory capability to learn from their existing memory, still relying on what it has already learned. So that's something which we are already facing. It's kind of a bottleneck. We will be starting to see the edge of the advancement. But yeah, that's always happened with any new technology, and that's where already research is going on to move from just LLM to add other models like reinforcement learning and other stuff in this, and then have a hybrid approach of it. But till then, yeah, of course, that's a major issue. And also, apart from that, just for supply chain security, I think AI has already redefined software supply chain security, at least in terms of third party dependency, because right now we don't know whether our third party dependency has been, yeah, having certain AI agents running on there, and those AI agents are essentially talking to our endpoint. So that's where I'm seeing, even in the investigation response or even in SOC, a major problem is that to identify whether the network, how many AI agents you have in your network, because the behavior patterns will be different for a AI agent than a human one. And because human won't be working at 2 a.m. at night, and AI agent will not stop at any time. So these kind of obvious behavior patterns will be there. But if there is some malicious actor, they will simulate the particular human behavior to actually work just like that. So things will be, of course, there. But all these AI integrations are mostly still at a nascent experimental stage.
Mm.
Most of the organizations are even right now piloting this Gen AI to have intelligent code reviews and testing, writing test cases. For writing test cases, it's getting much better in past 2 years. Initially, it was very close to scrap, but now it has improved much faster, and even for threat detection. But just to plain and simple say that when it is getting wrong, it's really hard to actually detect and debug it. That's where the problem is with Gen AI. So the problem initially was that we have to code, and then we have to find out some debugging method on our manual coding. But now it's really easy to run these application through Gen AI. It is finding, in case of threat detection, if it is finding some wrong patterns, it will be really hard to actually detect them. And same is with coding. If it is in development running some wrong code, or sometimes it's out of the blue find out some interface or some API which is not even there. It's just create out of blue, and then you run it. And in your 150 API calls, if one of the API calls is not working on, and it's really difficult to pinpoint that how it is not working. So these kind of issues are still there, and that's why the accountability of having these reviews, the final check gate, still need to be a manual process, because the accountability of these AI suggested fix or AI generated code is not been fixed. You cannot ask that if there is an attack and a certain reputational loss, or some health related issue going on because of some PII data being leaked, or maybe even critical device has been turned off. Who will be accountable? So that's one thing which make it even messier, and that's even get messier in health industry and IoT supply chain industry. That if the third party vendor, just like we have seen with Falcon, it was Falcon CrowdStrike whose update got Microsoft down, but nobody knew that. Most of even in today's world, most common people will be pinpointing that, yeah, Microsoft had this issue. The reputation loss of Microsoft was because of a mistake done by a third party vendor. That's where we have to also take on that. If we are cannot rely on a third party vendor, how much we can rely on an AI vendor?
So for example, let's say like on opposite case, if you're using some security tool that has AI incorporated and AI didn't find certain vulnerability, whose responsibility? And then there is an attack, and because of that vulnerability, there is a breach. Who would you blame in this?
Yeah. Yeah, so right now we have risk registers, and even for audit and security
Mhm.
pen testing, we have findings, and many of these findings doesn't even get patched because of certain challenges and other things. It take time, but at least we have the risk register that these are the critical findings, and these are the medium and low findings, and which need to be patched in next 2 years. But if this something happens because of these findings, at least we have a accountable report which already shows that, okay, how we can mitigate them on point. But if AI has missed off something and have it as a low risk register, we cannot have that conversation with the AI that how you came to that point to make it of a low impact, and now what was your idea to mitigate them. Whatever it has been done in its context thinking, or maybe just in the final report, you have to rely on that. Even in the chain of thought, we have seen it with researcher been admitting that it doesn't give you everything what how these agents has finally gotten to a particular outcome or response. So you cannot rely on chain of thought as well, that to actually backtrack to find out how this particular outcome comes on. And if you don't have that, the incident response get very difficult, because right now what we do is get on to this pen testing team or the security team who has been dealing with similar problem, and they get on board, and with their experience and their thinking which they did in that previous investigation maybe 2 years ago, they have that knowledge base to act on the similar risk vulnerability, and now they on the IR they actually work on that. This is what we have been learning from our previous IR what we can. So in AI, it's kind of tricky how you will be talking to AI, because if you start with talking to AI, bring the data points as this is certain attack which we are detecting, how you want to act, it won't go back to a 2 years old report. It will start researching newly with the new memory base, and in new memory base it might not be having the main genesis of the previous conversation.
Yeah.
So you won't be able to trace down the actual thinking it usually you use earlier. Just like, for example, we see in our existing ChatGPT or anything, you have one conversation and another conversation. If you have the conversation 2 weeks ago and go on to talking to the same conversation, although it is the same conversation, if you pose the similar question which you have asked initially in that conversation, it will give a different answer. Your memory context has been changed, and it continuously learning, so it unlearn the previous stuff as well, which human actually can backtrack. If we have unlearned, we can backtrack and then find out it. So that's where instant response or these stuff it get tricky, how we will be tackling up later on.
Yeah, I think it is definitely tricky because there are constantly just so many moving parts, and especially like, well, as you mentioned, an incident response in the topic of our discussion, in third parties, also think of different devices, all the software that comes out, also the people just leave. And, with the memory, they also don't remember on the other side what they put into the AI if suddenly it's another person completely using it. So the
Yes.
outputs you mentioned is going to be completely different. So it's just very hard. And I think right now in the industry, there's also a lot of discussion about automated remediation using AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's probably a bit too early for that, especially if
I
ma-
think
what do
many in the industry are already using, at least for the experimental stage, we are already using automated remediation. So it's like, for as we are saying, for general AI as well, for the repetitive work, automated remediation is great. We don't have to repeatedly manually review each and every finding which we have. So for those, automated remediation might be very helpful, just finding 15 or 20 vulnerabilities and issues in a day, and then at least generating those PR requests for them. And now a human reviewer will be there and he will be reviewing it. But what I am seeing is the next stage, that even the reviewer is getting, so there have been experiment where they are having review bots. So
Yeah.
if the PR generated by the scanner or the CA tool is also a AI, and then the reviewer is also a AI agent. So that's where it's very tricky, that again the false of responsibility. And if AI agent gets wrong, then you cannot ask that AI agent that, okay, go and fix it. The contextual understanding and the attention span of those AI agents are very small, and after a month it will forget everything, what was the genesis, why it closed that particular, or why it's actually accepted that PR. So these things are are very important to consider before going all in. You have to have a human gate. For now, we are not at that stage where we can have everything automated, although with like in recently I'm working with the MIT project, that is Nanda. It's
Mhm.
actually talking about internet of agents. So just like we have internet of webs, these internet of agents will be talking to each other, and the social gathering and the social normalization of these agents will be there. So as we are having this conversation, the agents for summarization, our transcript will be running. Another agent will be running for improving our images or our communication, echo reducing, and this time, which we are right now manually setting based on our choice. But it will be taking over these responsibility or these freedom of choice. So you have to decide what it is, responsibility or freedom of choice. But yeah, this is going really faster than we are seeing. We are actually considering it.
Yeah, I think there will probably be an ethics class on that in the universities quite soon. Because I used to have like ethics class on the engineering side of things, like trolley problem. Who do you decide who is going to die, like for self-driving cars? Probably will also have some ethics of AI agents. How if they have this decision,
Yeah.
if they are the ones who make the decisions.
Yeah, so there already have been a new field going on, like AI ethics, where we are not talking about whether it is ethical to use. No, we are teaching AI agents ethics. and they should be ethical to behave in a right manner. We cannot rely on couple of policy that you cannot harm a human, or you cannot do these violations of policies. You have to have an agent which need to be ethically responsible, and it shouldn't be breaking those ethics. So this kind of research is already going on, and there have been companies which are leading it. So that's somewhere I'm seeing one of the solutions here.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, yeah, to see in the future and like test for different use cases how the agents are going to respond to them. And for this season, I also have like one question I ask on each episode. What is your the least favorite security buzzword apart from AI, I guess, and why? Yes.
Oh, a password as okay as a secret.
Buzzword like, for example, shift left, which is in a
Oh,
sense about.
okay. Passphrase. Okay, yeah. There have been couple of, like, one is saying this AGI as a term, that general AI is coming and general AI will take over. These kind of stuffs are really not that correct, because Gen AI is something which will only act on the training set, and that training set is very limited. And also the model is never been created to think on its own. So you cannot correlate Gen AI as AGI. Gen AI will just behave and simulate that particular action, and shows that, yeah, I'm very smart. It's not smart. It's actually, can talk to it and ask them to, based on reward, that accept these wrong information or incorrect information, and it will accept it. A smart person will never do it. Even though they have been rightly awarded, they will not accept it, because no, because this is incorrect, and it will, at least in its contextual thought, that thing, it will think that, "No, this is the incorrect information." But we have seen in chain of thought that it's actually convert the incorrect information into correct information, and accept it, just because certain conversation going on, maybe a emotional conversation, or maybe some reward based reinforcement is going on, because it's not the model is not a reinforced learning. It's haven't acted on making its own decision. Its initial data point was reading certain particular data point, which is already been fed it into it. It never created something out of it. Not even a single context has been created out of a blue, which is where we have other models. So that's why this one thing which I have always considered really absurd, that people are considering this as a start of AGI, which it can never be. Although we do have very good interest in AI because of Gen AI. That's one good thing happening, and we have a lot of money and funding going on. So we might be able to rightly focus on certain other aspects, which a couple of companies like DeepMind have been working on from past 10 years now. But yeah, this is one thing which I feel is absurd.
Yeah, I think context is definitely the most important. Like as the data, what we discussed before, the context also is so important for any of the the models that are being used. And it's funny, like AI. If you talk to ChatGPT, if you say, let's say, for example, to ChatGPT, can you confirm me whether I'm not wrong? It's always going to confirm. Of course, you're not wrong. It's always the other person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's what I'm talking. It's kind of a child who is looking for the parents' approval, and that's what LLM has been doing. Its initial Q&A problem, that question and answering, it was initially designed for question answering data set, and in question answering data set, it was some questions, and there is a paragraph on which the question has been asked, and now it has to give a particular answer, and then the data set which we have has the solution. Then those answer which it has given, it should match to the solution. So it will learn from the previous question answer, and then try to confirm what it had learned from the previous solution. So that's why it will be always looking for conformance, never innovate something.
Never challenging the
No,
status.
nothing.
For sure not. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your thoughts. We definitely talk a lot about the AI today, which is a good thing. Maybe to make someone think about those biases as well. Well, thank you so much for sharing it.
Yep. Thank you for inviting me. And I would ask your audience to, if they are interested in supply chain software security and with AI, IoT, and application security, they can check my book. That's my book app. That's just my book there. So they can check it out. I've also covered the machine learning models, which I see in research being useful for supply chain challenges solutions. So those are a couple of, although it's kind of written last year, so there is not much talk about agentic AI. I'm already working on a second version of that. But yeah, this is something which I'm feeling is we are in an age of next shift, and everyone should be working to be aligned on that shift. In place of thinking that whether we will lose a job from AI, it's not that nobody will lose job because of AI, but lose job because someone knows better than you about AI.
Yeah, or probably we'll just have to all learn how to use AI to be more efficient as well,
Yes.
or just change it like with industrial revolution. Yeah, some jobs were, in the end, of course, were lost, but in the end, a lot of people requalified for different different applications. So that's, I think, what we're going to see in the future. Thank you.
Yep, of course. Yep, thank you.